Episode 5 of the shop vlog. Dark, moody blues. Maybe purple. As a matter of fact, I'm not even sure what color I'm going to put into the whole thing. I'm sorry. It's so cheesy. I can't do it. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And the shop vlog is where I take an image of mine and edit it from start to art, going through all the basics of retouching and finalization of the work with the artistic process. For today's episode, I've already taken this studio portrait image through the steps of frequency separation and dodging and burning. If you're unfamiliar with those retouching techniques in Photoshop, take a look at the card above. It will take you to the retouching series on this channel when you're done with this video, and there's in-depth guides in there for frequency separation, dodging and burning, and all the basics of retouching that you can find there. What we're going to do in today's video with this image is to prepare the background of the image to clean it up where we can see the background of the studio. Then we're going to change out the background with a texture and then go through some color grading with some areas that I don't normally explore. These are areas that I often forget are there, so I'm going to explore those today and see what we get. Now, I have not done this, so it could be a huge bust, but let's find out together by hitting up the Photoshop and continuing forward with episode 5 of the shop vlog. Introductions, as always, to get us started. This is my wonderful friend Veronica. You can see more of her amazing artwork by visiting the Instagram account at the link below. Let's talk about the photography really quickly. This was photographed in the studio against a piece of 50% seamless gray paper, and I was using one light in this scene. It's a Godox AD600 strobe with a 47-inch octabox with an interior panel of diffusion, the outer panel of diffusion, and a grid. And the softbox comes from Strobe Pro, which I highly recommend their products. I'm not sponsored by them. All my light modifiers come from Strobe Pro. They're a great company with really great stuff that lasts and lasts and lasts. So it's just this one light. It's a Rembrandt lighting pattern style so that we see the little triangle of light on this side. We have the nice shadow over here that's really helping to sculpt. The light is obviously off on camera left, and it's positioned above the model and tilted down so that as the light comes in, it creates these little moments of shadow along her jawline and other parts of her body where we can start to see the definition of highlight and shadow in the sculpt. Again, frequency separation has already been done using the clone stamp tool, mixer brush, and the regular paintbrush, dodging and burning and enhancing the eyes. The image is now ready to go to start putting together all the basics of the artwork itself. So the first thing I want to do is to clean up this background where we can see how in frame, we can see the edge of the paper essentially. And the easiest way to do this is to use content aware fill, which is the latest dialogue version of it, is newest in Photoshop CC 2020. So I'm using Photoshop as a part of the Creative Cloud program. So for $10 a month, you get access to Photoshop, Lightroom, and Bridge, and all the software is updated on a regular basis. If you're using an older version of Photoshop, you may not have this specific dialogue for content aware fill, but you do have the option for content aware fill. It's just been around for a while. Mainly, you just have to use the fill command and then change it to content aware fill. But the new dialog gives you the option to really kind of hone in what is being sampled by Photoshop to fill in the background. For today's purposes, it's not going to be that big of a deal to see this because there isn't really that much in the background that Photoshop Skynet needs to figure out how to get rid of it. So it's an easy example today, but I want you to see the dialogue nonetheless. So I'm using the polygonal lasso tool to make a selection, and I'm essentially going to make sure that I make my selection outside the bounds of the document. So I'm going to click over here and make an anchor point. Then I'm going to bring it in because I want to come in and make a box selection around this entire area where we can see the edge of the paper. But I want to come in just enough to give Photoshop something to sample of the paper itself. So I essentially want to include a thin strip of it. So I'm going to make sure that there's a part of the paper that's been selected and then just complete my selection so I have the marching ants showing me what's inside of it. Now I'm going to come up to Edit and Content Aware Fill. This will bring up the new dialog, and let's decipher it really quickly. You have a whole bunch of different controls over here of different things you can do, like auto, rectangular, and all those things, which I don't know what they mean. But what's important is anything in green is Photoshop's way of letting you know what it's potentially sampling to fill in this selection area. And in this window, we get a live view of what it actually is going to look like. Now, again, this is a really easy example because it's just gray paper and it happens to be at the outer perimeter edge where it's darkest in this image. But if you were trying to clone in something like get rid of a tree or a building or a car or something on those lines, and there's other elements in the background that you can potentially source from, anything painted in green is what Photoshop will place into that selection. So you can take away or add green so you can further drive the content aware fill, drive Skynet to give you John Connor. But at this point, I think everything looks fine from what it selected, so I'm good with that. So I'm just simply going to hit OK. And now it outputs that new selection to its own layer in the layer stack above. The selective is still active, so I'm going to hit Controller Command and the letter D for deselect. Then I'm going to drop down to the background layer and make another selection, making sure to go outside the edges of the actual document itself, complete that selection, including some of the paper so that Photoshop can potentially sample that, and then go back into Edit and Content Aware Fill. Then once that's pulled up, anything in green is what it's sampling, and then we'll see that live view. So even though it's sampling potentially from her face, it didn't choose to put that in there because it's Skynet, not StupidNet. I just came up with that. I think that's really funny. So StupidNet, we're going to hit OK, and then it's going to output that next layer. So now we have essentially two new layers in the layer stack here that have been filled with those pieces of background paper or whatever. So I'm going to hit Control or Command and the letter D to deselect. Then I'm going to select all of these and come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. So now that they've been flattened to one layer. The next thing that I want to do is I want to add a texture to the background. I like the gray paper. I like the neutralization of it because with this gray dark paper, I can add colors in the color grading process very easily to this image. But I want there to be a texture because as you continue to add colors, the image can feel like there's just this ambiguous background where she's just not separating from it very well, or just there's nothing there. With the lighting and the way it hit, we have enough light over here on camera right that she is separated from the paper. So it's not the end of the world if we don't add a texture, but I want to add a texture to it. And the easiest way to do that is again to rely upon our friend Skynet. So I'm going to hit the letter W, which will activate the quick selection tool. And when I activate the quick selection tool, one of the controls that I have is select subject. This is going to let Skynet look at the image and try to figure out where John Connor is. So when I hit it, it's going to think about it for a little bit, and then it's going to make a selection right around Veronica. Now, this used to be not that great when it was debuted in Photoshop CC, blah, blah, blah. But it has gotten so much better. In the update to 2020, a few months ago, they greatly improved this algorithm. So it does a really fantastic job making a selection around somebody. This isn't an accurate, perfect selection, but it's close enough. If you do want an accurate, perfect selection, then my advice is to use select subject as your first step, then click the box that says select and mask. That's going to bring up a new dialog that is a part of the selection process where you get a bunch of different controls over here to ultimately control the selection itself, how much it goes in and out from its base definition of what the perimeter of the selection is. You can use different tools up here to take away or to add to the selection. And ultimately, again, use the algorithm to separate some of the colors of the background around things like hair so that you can pull out more hair from the image. But it also comes with drawbacks because the more that you rely upon the algorithm to do the thinking for you, the more you're going to start to introduce artifacts or other edges around the entire perimeter that can cause issues. So ultimately, no matter how great Skynet is, then you're going to just have to use your own mind. So once this is done, I'm going to hit OK. It's going to output to a new layer with a layer mask itself. If I wanted a perfect selection, I would have to go around the entire perimeter of the selection itself and start cleaning up all of this fringing and all of these edges. This is a part of the process of selecting somebody and extracting them from the image, whether you're doing just a basic portrait like this in the studio, or if you're doing a fantasy composite or whatever, you have to clean up the layer mask by hand. There's just not enough AI technology to make a perfect mask every single time. But because we now have Veronica extracted, and it's good enough because we're going to be adding a texture to the background where it won't be on her, but it'll be on the background itself, it's very unlikely that the texture will appear on the finer edges on the outer perimeter of her or the selection that we made. Now, depending upon the background. If we use a background that's full of vibrant colors and a whole bunch of textures and so forth, then it may show up. And this is where design comes into play. If we look at this dark, dramatic, moody, blue, purple, whatever portrait, do we want to add some big clown show of a background? No, like we need to add something that's simple and just provides space, the feeling of space, and that we are somewhere. It's the color grading and all the colors and so forth that will infuse into the image that should do the heavy lifting for the artwork of the image. So I have 3 different pieces of stock that I've purchased from Adobe to use. This one I like because it's gray. It has nice textures into it, so it works really well. And because it's a medium to dark gray, it doesn't stand out that much when you include it into the background of your original image, but it gives you that wonderful texture. And built into it through the center part, it's just a little bit of a more bright luminescence to a lighter gray that then moves into the outer darker vignette around the perimeter itself. So I'm pretty sure this one will work really well because I use this texture all the time in different images. But this texture here, blue is my favorite color. Blue is the Pantone color of the year. It's got great texture in it. It has no built-in vignette where the outer perimeter is darker and then it starts to get lighter progressively, concentrically as it comes into the center. But I think this texture would be fine because we're going to be using a blending mode of soft light. So this texture is going to interact with the original image, and 50% of it is going to be removed anyway. So it should be fine without the vignette. And then this third texture I used to use a lot because I really loved the colors in it. I loved the texture in it. I loved the very pronounced hotspot, and it would work well in certain situations. But I stopped using it because ultimately the hotspot sometimes just didn't fit, and the colors would interact. There's so much red and yellows and oranges and a little bit of blue and purple up here that they sometimes were problematic in how they would interact. So I ultimately actually want to start with this one and see how it comes into play and gauge the other two against this one. So I'm going to hit V for the move tool. In this document, I'm going to hold Shift and then click anywhere inside this picture. I'm going to click and hold and then drag it up to the tab that represents my original image. When I drag it up and the image pops up and it's activated, because I've held Shift, no matter where I put my mouse in here, it's going to drop this new texture precisely in the center anchor point of this image. So it's just a quick little thing to do by holding Shift so that you can drop it right there. You don't have to go find it. If we didn't hold Shift and I let go of my mouse somewhere up here, the center of this texture would be right here. So a lot of it would be off the screen. So we'd have to hit like the Control or Command minus keys to zoom all the way back out and find the texture like this and then bring it over here and whatever. So just hold Shift and bring it up there. It'll drop it right into the center every single time. So now what we need to do is to reposition this texture in between these two layers so that we have the extracted layer of Veronica and then it's above the background layer. I'm going to resize it so it will fit the entire background perimeter. And to do that, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and grab any one of the corners of this texture. And because I have checked this box under the Move tool, Show Transform Controls, any one of these will allow me to transform it. When I hold Alt or Option, it resizes all of them at the same time. And I can make sure that the entire piece first goes off the document itself. Then I'm letting go of the mouse button. I'm letting go of the Alt or Option button. And now I'm going to grab a corner and not hold Alt or Option and just push this back until these two side perimeters match up. Now I can hold the Shift key and I'm going to grab this middle box and transform it. And when I hold the Shift key, it tells Photoshop to no longer constrain the overall proportions of this. Essentially, it's going to stretch it or compress it. So I can push it down to make sure that it's completely resized to fit my entire document. Now, last little thing that I always do is that I have snap set in Photoshop so that when we come up to view, snap is selected. So as you're moving something, it snaps to different edges where it thinks you want it to be. So in this case, this center box snapped to the outer perimeter edge of the entire document itself. I am old school. Sometimes it used to work, sometimes it didn't. And it's the worst thing in the world to finish your artwork and start to deliver it or post it to social media, and you'll look and see this tiny little thin line of pixels at the top where the texture didn't cover it because you actually came in just a little bit by accident into the document itself. So I've just gotten into a habit years ago, and I still do this. Once I have resized it and stretched it without constraining the proportions, I then return to a corner, hold Alt or Option, grab it, and just stretch it out just a little bit so that I can make sure around all perimeters it's filled in with the texture. Now I'm going to hit Enter to accept the transformation, and then I'm going to think about this hotspot and where it's going to be. If I change the blending mode to soft light right now, the brightest part of this texture is going to be down here, arguably in a place that is not that bright of texture. So I think I want that hotspot to be here or here. So I need to flip this texture and flip it on the vertical. So I'm going to come up to Edit, Transform, and Flip Vertical. And that's going to flip the whole thing like that. Then I can do the same thing again and flip it horizontally. So Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. And now that hotspot is kind of matching up in a spot that makes sense from the original image. Then I'm going to come up to the blending modes and change this blending mode to soft light. So we're losing a lot of this really quickly, and we just have this warm little background. And I kind of, again, I like the drama of it, but I want to see more of this background itself. So let's explore just a few more to see what happens. Screen, no. Color dodge, no, it's kind of interesting. Lighten, forget it. Overlay is going to make it even darker. Soft light's the best. So the last thing that we could explore with this is to do a blend if, but I don't want to quite do that yet because I want to see something else. What I'm going to do is to start playing with the other textures. And this is why using Select Subject and Skynet to make the selection for you in an image like this, it's super easy and quick, and it's a lot of fun because it allows you the creative time to play and see what else comes into the mix. So I'm going to grab that gray texture that I know will work well. Let's bring it into the image. Again, I'm holding the Shift key. As soon as this tab is activated, I can see it. No matter where I put my mouse, it drops it right into the center. What I'm going to do is move it down so it's the first texture in the layer stack. Resize it in the same way we just talked about. Fits pretty well. I don't need to stretch these two center boxes, I think, and hit Enter to accept the transformation. Then I'm going to change this one to soft light as well. Nope, that's too dark. Overlay. Nope. Screen. Soft light. So I do think I want to do a blend if. And keep in mind, part of the shop vlog is I haven't done this yet. I haven't added. I mean, I've added textures to images. I mean, come on. Like, I watched a YouTube video yesterday on how to do it, but I haven't worked with this image yet for this. So I don't know exactly what's going to work. And that's part of the education offering of the shop vlog, is that you get to see me problem solve. So I think the first thing that I want to do is I'm going to turn off the first texture that we worked with, and see that gray works just fine. And we can see more of it on this side than what we were seeing with that red texture. Although I take that back. We could still see the red texture. It's just not as prominent. So what can we do? We can brighten up the texture itself by taking it into Adobe Camera Raw and adjusting the exposure, taking some of the shadows out, the black point. We can use adjustment layers like an exposure adjustment layer to make everything brighter, and it will certainly show up. So just so that I can demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to make an exposure adjustment layer and simply increase the overall exposure of the texture. It's not affecting Veronica because the adjustment layer is below the layer of Veronica. Now we can see more of the texture. So even though it's on a blending mode of soft light, we see it. Let's turn on the original one and turn off the gray one. And now we can definitely see more of it. That's certainly a way to solve that problem. But I'm going to leave that adjustment layer there just for giggles. What I want to do is turn off the original one, and I want to do a blend if. So I'm going to turn this back to normal as a blending mode for this texture layer. And then I'm going to double click anywhere on the layer where there is not a word or the thumbnail, and that will bring up the layer style dialog box. Blend if is right through here. And essentially you want to first make sure that it says blend if gray so that it will start interacting with that. Now, if you're not familiar with blend if is a very powerful process that is often overlooked in most of the work that I see in composite work, or just retouching in general, or creating artwork in Photoshop. You have the ability to tell Photoshop this layer, which is the texture layer, it can seep down to the background layer based upon the shadows or the highlights. Or you can tell Photoshop the underlying layer, the base layer of Veronica, can kind of up and through based upon the highlights or the shadows. And you can feather that by splitting these little triangles. So if I move the triangle of this layer, you're going to see a very rough process of how it's interacting. To split the triangle and feather that effect, hold the Alt or Option key and grab the right side of the triangle. And now it feathers it into play. And see how the blend if is now making it feel like that paper is the texture, not a texture that's blending with it like a soft light layer blending mode or overlay. It's pushing through the texture. That's why I like using this gray texture, because this is a simple example. The gray texture layer is interacting with the gray paper based upon the shadows, blend if gray. So they're a happy little family here. Let's hit cancel and turn on the red one, because now I feel bad because I'm using a simple example. Let's go back to normal. for this big bright red, orange, yellow, purple, green, blue thingy. I'm going to double click anywhere where there's not the word, bring up the layer style dialog. This layer, I want it to interact with the layer below. Let's try this layer's shadows, the texture layer, holding Alt or Option, split the triangle and letting it go through. And it's still working. See how it makes it feel like the background is this texture. And there's a subtle difference here, because if we use the texture as a blending mode of soft light, overlay, screen, lighten, whatever, it's interacting with the paper. You can see qualities of the paper, the light coming through, all these different things. When we do it this way with Blend If, it's like taking this separate layer's texture and merging it with the background itself, becoming a new element. And it's often a better way to get results that look more realistic by using Blend If than using just a layers blending mode like soft light or overlay or whatever. I'm going to double click it again to go back into the layer style. I'm going to close this and I want to just try the underlying layer and see how that goes. So that's a faster, more dramatic effect, and see how this is a great example. The shadow side of this, the underlying layer, which is just simple plain gray paper, it's coming up and through, and look at all the texture. It's gone now because we're letting the bottom layer have prevalence as it blends through, because that's what we chose with underlying layer. If we say this layer, we're saying the darkest parts of this layer need to start blending down first so that they're blending with the background layer. And that's why it started in the outer perimeter, and the last thing to start blending is that hot spot with the texture. So I think that looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now let's turn on that gray and let's change the gray to soft light. So the gray is now acting like a natural vignette, and it's working with the scene even more. And I kind of dig that. I like the way it looks. I mean, I'm not quite the biggest fan of that orange hotspot now, because again, my intention, all joking aside, was to work blues and purples into this. But who knows? Let's see. Let's continue forward, because this is the creative process, and see what happens. So we've worked with the texture. Oh, you know what? Let's turn these off real quick. And let's grab that blue one just to see. I hope this does not look good so that we can just move on, because if it looks good, then it's just going to take forever to make a decision. I'm resizing it. I'm going to change it to soft light because this one's pretty bright. Darn it. It looks kind of cool. I like the zigzag pattern. I love the blue. Blue's my favorite color. I'm biased. What do you want from me? I don't care. Let's go back to normal and try the Blend If. I'm going to double click anywhere where there's not a word or the thumbnail, and let's say this layer first gets to blend out. Oh, that's even more neat. That's neaties. Let's do the underlying layer. See, again, we're just going to lose this texture, so I don't like that. So this layer, letting it blend. Man, I don't know about the Blend If. Let's go soft light again. It's so dark. So let's use the exposure adjustment layer. Nah, that's not going to help. It's because the background is dark. So if we were to move this exposure adjustment layer and turn it on and lighten up the background, the more light we add to it, I'm losing something with this texture that I just don't like. I love the color blue, but I'm just not digging it. So for purposes of video, I'm going to say no, we're going to get rid of the blue texture. Thank you, blue texture. We salute you. Hi, Dave. All right, so I think these two textures are going to be our winners. So at this point, let's make a composite layer of everything and make that its own document, so we can start goofing around with color grading that and not screw up this document in case we decide to get rid of some stuff. So I'm going to come to the topmost active layer and hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E for everything, or Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. Then right click this layer anywhere where there's not a word or the thumbnail, and come down to Duplicate Layer, and then choose a new document. If we don't, it's just going to duplicate it inside of this document, which is right here, and we'll just have layer 4 or whatever. But if we choose here and say make a new document with just this layer, now we have our own new document that is just the composite layer of everything. So let's color grade. There's many different ways to color grade. If you haven't seen the retouching series, check out the retouching series. All kinds of tutorials on color grading in there. But what I want to do is one that I often forget to use and play around with, and it's actually the color calibration of the camera in Adobe Camera Raw. So I'm going to take this image into Adobe Camera Raw by hitting Control, Shift, and A, or Command, Shift, and A on a Mac. And once we're inside Adobe Camera Raw, if you're making the transition, by the way, from Lightroom into Photoshop, Adobe Camera Raw is your friend, because Adobe Camera Raw is essentially the develop module in Lightroom. So you have a lot of controls in here. But under here for color calibrations, you have essentially controls of the tint of green to magenta for the shadows, but you have red, green, blue, RGB. We can change the saturation of them. We can change the hue of them. This is similar to the color mixer, which if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I love the color mixer here. We can change the individual hue of each one of these colors, but keep in mind, these are essentially the color channels. And you need red, green, and blue combined together to see this image the way our human eyes see it as far as digital photography is concerned. So you're getting more back to the core basics of a color. Instead of the color mixer being choose between red, orange, and yellow, we're just dealing with one of three primary colors that are in our image, our digital file. So what I want to do is I'm going to experiment first by just kind of desaturating. I'm desaturating the blue a little bit and see how it's affecting it. Like, yes, there's blue in her sweater and her jeans are black, but like as we take it away, it's affecting the image in an interesting dynamic. And I just kind of want to experiment with that for a little bit. If we take the red saturation down, we're definitely going to see that more in her skin tone than anything, because every human being on earth has orange, yellow, and red in their skin tones. More orange and yellow than red. Okay, let's take the green saturation down. Oh, that's kind of cool too. Let's take the red saturation up and take the blue one down. Yeah, so we're leaving like some of that warmness in her skin, but there's just this interesting feeling that I'm seeing that it's like half vampire, half human, and all beautiful. Veronica and I are friends. Her husband's a really nice guy. So anyway, I'm going to increase the saturation of green just to see what we get. It's really making that hotspot stand out, and I just don't like that hotspot. I'm just going to have to hit cancel because I just know it's just going to drive me batty. So I'm closing this little composite that we made. I'm going to delete the composite layer itself. And oh boy, what do I do now? Let's change the hue of this and see how it goes into play. So I'm going to make a hue saturation adjustment layer and clip it to this texture. Clipping it simply means that now the adjustment layer will only affect the layer that it's clipped to and not all of the other layers in the layer stack. To clip something to it, it's very easy. You come up to layer, create clipping mask, and it will do it that way. And see, now there's this little arrow that designates that it's clipped to this. You can also position your mouse between the two layers and hold the Alt or Option key. And when you do, it will change your mouse from the hand to a square with an arrow pointing down. That will clip it to it. So now that it's clipped to it, I'm going to change the hue of that background to blue. Ooh, let's go this way and see what we find. Pretty. I like that. I'm going to desaturate it just a touch. I like what it's doing. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that highlight though. I think the highlight's too strong. So I'm going to turn off the Hue Saturation Adjustment layer. I'm going to grab the actual layer itself of texture and then take that into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter by hitting Control Shift and A or Command Shift and A. And then I'm simply going to come up to the basic sliders and choose highlights and just bring them down, which is going to tone that little spot down here in the middle. Let's take the white point down just a touch too. Let's add more texture to it for giggles, a little bit more clarity and a little bit of dehaze. Yeah, the dehaze is really going to make things stand out. Hit OK. And better. I don't like all the texture. I'm hitting Control Z to go one step back on my history, or Command Z. Going back to Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. Do the same thing except all that fancy texture stuff. Take the highlights down big time, the white point down. Let's increase the black point just a touch, maybe. No. Shadows, we can pull them out just a touch. And that's it. We're not going to, I so want to grab the texture slider. That's better. Now let's turn on the hue saturation. Yeah, that's better. That's fine. Let's see what okay, we're good. So I'm going to make the composite layer at the top. I'm not going to make it its own document because I'll just be careful. And if I'm not, it'll make the video even more entertaining, hopefully. So let's take it into Adobe Camera Raw and go back to the color channel mixers here at the bottom. Let's take that blue away and see what happens now. I like what it does to her in her skin. That's kind of interesting. So I'm going to hit cancel and duplicate this layer one more time. So essentially now I have two versions of it. So I can mask this one down, the one that's at the top of the layer stack, so we can see the background being blue, but we can take it away from Veronica. So Control Shift and A to go back into Adobe Camera Raw as the filter, and then take the blue primary saturation down just a touch. Let's increase the red saturation ever so slightly to see what we get. Maybe a little bit of the green too. It's just kind of interesting. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. I like it. So I'm gonna hit OK. I even like the way the blue looks in the background. I don't think we need to mask it. So I want to try one more thing. I've referenced this in the retouching series for color grading, that split toning is the poor man's color grade, poor person's color grade, because you can essentially choose a color for the highlights and a color for the shadows, and a two-tone color is a color grade, or choosing two colors and infusing it into the scene is a color grade. So what I want to do, the way you actually see it when you use split toning, is you have to increase the saturation. If you don't increase the saturation, you can sit here and slide this hue slider back and forth and nothing happens. But the moment I increase the saturation, now it's saturating the shadows, the darker part of the image, with the color that we choose in the hue slider here. So let's choose that blue and see what we get. Shift it this way. Ooh, it's kind of neat. And I'm going to take the saturation down just a touch. Now for the highlights, let's increase the saturation just a little bit, and let's shift it over to orange, orange yellow, orange you glad you're not a banana, and right about there. Then take the saturation down. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Like, we've got some funky skin tone going on that maybe I don't like now the more that I look at it. I like the background. I'm hit OK. I like it, but I don't. There was something about that muted blue that I like, that half vampire, half not kind of thingy. I'm going to duplicate the layer again, go back into ACR. I just want to see. I just want to see. Come on. I just want to see. Adobe Camera Raw. Let's go. I don't wanna. I like the other example, David. Let's decrease the saturation. Yeah, I like what it does to her. It's just kind of neat. Okay, so let's shadows. Blue, purple. Aren't you glad you're not a purple? No, I like the purple too, but I'm digging that. I think it looks kind of neat. I like the blue of the background. I don't know if I'm an exact fan of what it does to her skin. So here's a way to test it. We happen to have in the layer stack a layer mask already of her. So what I want to do is I'm going to hold Alt and Shift and click this layer mask. My bad, I didn't want to hold Alt when I clicked it. Click the layer mask first to activate it, then hold Alt and Shift and drag it up to this layer up top. And it duplicated it, but it also inverted it because I was holding Shift. Forgot you don't have to do that anymore. So if I hit Control I, I'm inverting it now so that we're seeing the effect. No, I did want it that way. Control I, my gosh. So now we're seeing anything in white on the layer mask is seeing the effect of the layer, which is the background, and then it just took it off of her. So we have that original layer back there and just more of that bright blue. Now we can lower the density of the layer mask, which is essentially just taking it away, taking away the black, and so that we can start to see that effect, but we're minimizing it by 50-ish%. So I think that actually kind of looks cool. But welcome to my world of art. I very rarely do one thing and I'm like, perfect, done, cut and paste, print it. No. So what I want to do, I'm going to grab this layer. I'm going to turn these off. I'm going to make myself a new composite layer. All right. So this is the one. So we'll duplicate this one. Oh my gosh. Right click anywhere where there's not words, David. Duplicate layer, come down to new, make it its own, flatten it, and then let's add a solid color of blue. Let's change that to soft light maybe. It's too dark. Screen. Lighten. Lighten. Lighten is always like the go-to when I do colors in a scene. Yeah, see, that's so much prettier to me. But it's also illuminating so much of the image now, because we chose to use a color to lighten the image itself. Without it, see how much darker it is. We're adding that color into the scene. This gives it a matte effect. I really dig that, although I'm trying to break myself of that. Let's just do a quick blend if and see what happens. Not double click the word. So a quick blend if, and let's say this layer gets to blend down with the shadows. So we're taking it away, which essentially means we're letting some of those shadows come up and through. We can do it this way too, and it's much faster a way to get there. And we're kind of color grading it just a little bit. If I take this away, I like how the blue is interacting with her skin. It's kind of neat. I think it's kind of cool. Let's add a selective color adjustment layer. And let's take the reds and make them more vibrant. Yeah, that's kind of cool. And it's similar to what we did. Let's close this. We don't need these anymore. It's similar to what we were doing with the RGB channel. Although the blues are more rich in there. And this one's interacting with the skin to give it a little bit of a purple magenta feel instead of not. I kind of like both. I like the vibrance of this blue in the background, but I like the way it's interacting with your skin here. So what if we take the density of this layer mask back to "You're my density"? It's Back to the Future, George McFly, and he meant to say destiny. It just jumped in my head. I'm a veritable fountain of movie quotes. All right, so I took the density back up of this so that it's been masked off of Veronica. And now I'm going to go grab that actual solid color adjustment layer that we just made, so I don't have to remember what the color was. And I'm just going to drag it up into my new document. And here it is. And then I'm going to clip it down to her. All right, because it's affecting her. So let's grab the layer mask. And I held Alt or Option this time and not Shift. And it made it an exact copy of the layer mask. I want to invert it now so that we see it. Yeah, best of both worlds. So to recap, in case you didn't follow what we just did, here we made a layer mask so that this will only be visible on Veronica. And because it's set to lighten with the same opacity adjustments, we're getting the interesting skin tones that I liked. This layer here has everything we did with the RGB channels in ACR, creating that background, but it's masked off of her, so that ultimately this one stands through on top and is interacting, so it's the best of both worlds. I'm going to go back to this one now just to dry myself back. Nope, don't like this one. Closing it. Can't look at it anymore. It'll keep me up at night. I like that background, but I kind of want to start taking off the saturation, the hue saturation adjustment layer that we put in here to change that background from orange to blue. I want to take it off in certain key areas and just see what we get. So I'm going to hit B for brush, and I'm going to come up and grab my haze brush that I made a while ago that I really love to use in situations like this. And I'm going to start painting black onto the layer mask at like 30-ish%. And my brush is set to just auto rotate around and start taking away the shapes. Let's go to 100% because I feel like something's wrong. Oh, I can't see a damn thing because, whoopsies. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Okay, so let's continue, and we'll man, wait, there's got to be an easier way to do this. I'm gonna turn these back on. I'm gonna delete the hue saturation adjustment layer because we already have a composite layer that has its effect in it. Let's turn off the ones we don't need. Okay, so what we're going to do is on this layer's mask, we're going to start painting black, which will start taking away this layer, which is the blue background, and it will let us start seeing the orange background itself. I took my flow down to 10%. Let's go 30. Yeah, now we can start to see some interesting colors come into play of that background. That's what I wanted. I wanted just the feeling of like there's something else there interacting, just something different. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like this. Okay, and I think we're good. Because if I keep doing this, eventually I'm just going to fill the entire freaking mask with black. So I like the way this looks. I like how that blue is interacting with Veronica. But I do think I want to take the density of that down just a touch. No, I need to minimize this layer even further of opacity. So I just want it to be a subtle little hint of that blue because subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. So looking at this, it's kind of got this like camouflage feeling is what I'm getting from the background now of what I just did. Man, I like the orange now too. Welcome to my world. No, I'm going to screw it. I'm deleting those. I like the orange. I like the orange. Aren't you glad you're a banana? I'm going to make a hue saturation adjustment layer, clip it to this one, and change the hue of this just a touch to be a little deeper into those reds. I like the blue and the way it's interacting with her. I'm going to increase the opacity again. Nope, got to bring it down. It's doing too much. I think I'm okay with this. Go back to a basic brush before I forget. There we go. I think I'm okay with this. But I want to add more things to it. Let's add a purple. Deep purple. Let's change it to soft light. Decrease the opacity and fill. Let's definitely take it off of her. And see how it interacts with that background. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's giving a little bit more of that magenta warmth to the image or to the background. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So let's make a composite layer of everything at the top. Let's do a high pass filter for that. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to come up to filter, other, high pass. This is a great way to add texture to an image. But keep in mind, the higher you set this radius, the more gritty and HDR it's going to look. So don't go too far with it. I'm going to take it to 2 and hit OK. And then as we can see, there's texture there and it's interesting for the high pass, but we have to change the blending mode of this so it can interact with the image. So the harshest one is linear light, followed by vivid and hard light and all these. Soft light is the most minimal. And as we're zoomed into her face now, let's do the before and after. This is the after and before. It's a very minor, subtle hint of the details. If we change it to overlay, that's you know, a little bit stronger than soft light, and I'm not minding that so much. So I'm going to hit Control or Command on the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. Yeah, I'm digging that. So I'm going to make a new composite layer of everything because composite layers are just fancy. And then I'm going to take it into Adobe Camera Raw to finish up the image itself. So in here, I like to do, stop beeping at me. I like to do just some finalization touches. So I'm going to first and foremost take the shadows out just a little bit more, increase the black points, increase the white points, take the highlights down just a touch again, increase the overall contrast to the scene. This is where we can add some texture to it, but we don't want to go too far because we've already got good texture in the scene to begin with. So just a touch of texture, just a touch of the clarity, and a little bit of dehaze. Vibrance, we'll push that up +5. Let's push up saturation to like 6, 7. Yeah, I kind of like that. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna hit OK. And we've done that little subtle final push. The last thing I want to do, I was going to create a vignette, but I don't think we need to. Let's try it anyway. So in many ways to create vignettes, the easiest one that I like to do is to hit Control-J to duplicate the layer, take it into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter, and simply bring the exposure down. We could use an adjustment layer of exposure to do this. I just got stuck in doing it in ACR once, and I just have always done it that way. So I'm going to make a white layer mask onto this, which is a reveal all, so it's revealing the entire darker layer. Then I'm going to hit G for the gradient tool. Make sure that my gradient is set under the basics of this one, which is whatever your foreground color is to transparency. In this case, my foreground color is black. So when I start using the gradient tool, it's going to paint black, but then fade it off into nothingness. And that's essentially going to start taking away this dark layer wherever I want to reveal the brighter layer underneath. I want to make sure that my gradient tool is set to the radial gradient and my opacity is 30%. And I'm going to start on Veronica's face with the gradient tool and just start taking away this dark layer, leaving the outer perimeter. And since it's a radial gradient, it's making that circle. Yeah, I'm glad I did it. I like the way this feels. Okay, there we go. Done. I'm going to flatten the whole thing. By the way, I have reassigned the F keys in my Photoshop to be basic functions that I often do. So for me, F4 is layer, flatten image. You can see right here. If you incidentally want to change any of the hotkeys in your Photoshop, simply come up to Edit and then Keyboard Shortcuts and navigate to the section that you're looking for. So like layer, you can come all the way down to flatten, and this is every single option until you get to F4, where the heck is it? There it is, flatten image, and then you just put a new hotkey into there. Done. I don't want to add a lens flare or any other of that fancy stuff. I like the way it looks. The blue in her sweater stands against the orange in the background. We've worked some of those blues and purples into her skin. It's a color grade. It's retouched. It's a pretty picture. We did some extractions and added textures, and I think it's a finished piece of artwork. So I'm going to save the full resolution version of this, and then I will compress it down for Facebook and Instagram story, and then push it out to social media in a few days and share the exciting adventure of the shop vlog. So let's finish up today's episode with some final thoughts. The key takeaway from the shop vlog, or at least my hope, is that you will see me go through things where I problem solve. And you get to see, obviously, in this episode that I was torn between blues and oranges, and I like different versions of what I see, but ultimately I just have to go with something. And this is a testament not to my sense of perfectionism or my inability to make decisions. It is about having access to several tools and options in Photoshop. Now, that's not me boasting. This is me trying to identify that the more you learn why things work in Photoshop, the more you build up your skill set. Hopefully, for you too, it will become difficult to make a decision between 2 or 3 different versions of a piece of artwork, because you've been able to utilize your skills in Photoshop to create those multiple versions of artwork, all of which you like. That's the goal. Being able to expand your knowledge and be able to give your own self agency to create your artwork, and then ultimately have to make the tough decision of which one is the final piece. That ends the episode of the shop vlog. Please let me know in the comments below if this was helpful for you today. I want to continue forward with the shop vlog 2 or 3 times a month, but I want to make sure that this is a format that you enjoy watching. I don't want to waste your time on the YouTubes. If you like the content and what you found in today's video, make sure to give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel, because new content debuts each week in photography and Photoshop education. And when you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks again, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.